All right. Welcome, folks. We are just beginning. Hello. This is the Schooner America. What I love about this is America at her best and highest on August 22nd, 1851, off the south coast of England, specifically sailing around the Isle of Wight. Those of you that know this geography will recognize the Needles up here in the upper left, geological feature there off the south coast of England. This is America en route to winning the cup that was eventually named after her. I'll point out a couple of things in here that I find of interest. A round cockpit, that's the signature of the vessel. We'll talk about that as we go along. Steered by a tiller. So we have a 100-plus foot schooner steered by a tiller. Kind of interesting, kind of different, right? And this big gold eagle spanning the stern. She was low, she was black, she was very sexy looking. She was also very odd looking, almost like a spaceship. But we'll talk about that. But the low black schooner became her nickname. And this is the low black schooner in a fairly dramatized image. You've got the New York City fancy boys back here who are funding the whole program. And you've got some sailors up front who are waiting for the next order to pull sails up and down, etc. So this is the star of the show. However, how does this low black schooner and tie in with this? A World War II patrol torpedo boat. This is a wooden patrol torpedo boat built in Eastport, Annapolis, Maryland, USA. A Vosper-designed patrol torpedo boat running on the Chesapeake Bay at speed in 1942. How do these two completely disparate vessels come together? And that's the story. So first, America. The Schooner America was built over the winter of 1850 into 1851. Cold winter, lower Manhattan. She was funded and sponsored by some of the wealthiest sportsmen in New York City. These are the gentlemen who were creating the new American economy. Schuyler's, John Cox Stevens of the Stevens Institute, the descendants of Alexander Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler, two of them in this group. So a syndicate of yachtsmen came together and built this schooner. And her goal was to win races. They liked the sporting aspect of it. They also liked betting money on races. There was no NFL yet. There was no fantasy football yet. There was not even Major League Baseball yet. So you could bet on horse racing and you could bet on yacht racing. And these guys were into yacht racing. So they wanted to build a very fast schooner. As it was being built to the best design, the state-of-the-art design by the best builder with the best materials, no expenses spared, she was already developing a reputation. So this is in a newspaper account that winter. It says yacht building at New York to compete against the English fleets. As she was on the stocks in lower Manhattan, an invitation had arrived from England. The Royal Yacht Squadron was the sponsor of the greatest racing fleet of yachts in the world at that time. And they said, we understand you have a yacht under construction in lower Manhattan. Please accept our invitation to come and compete against our fleet this coming summer in our races. The gentlemen of New York were very excited about this. We are going to have an opportunity. What a summer. We'll go have an adventure on the other side of the Atlantic. We will race against the British. We'll test our boat. Maybe we'll win some money. Maybe we'll meet Queen Victoria. Let's do this. So they decided they're going to ship their boat across the Atlantic. It's in the news. Even as it's being built, newspapers are covering this. There's a lot of national pride that begins to come into this boat. The naming of her, America, that tells me their aspirations were big. That tells me that they wanted to compete on a big stage. This is where she was built in lower Manhattan, right around where 11th and 12th Street come in to the East River. There's nothing left of where she was built. There's not even a plaque. The FDR highway blows through there. There's no signs. I've been down there and looked, as have other people that are interested in this. So that's roughly where it is in Manhattan, the site of the Brown Shipyard. And again, I'm sorry about this Zoom thing on the bottom. But you can get the idea. This is a Melbourne Smith image of what she looked like at the time of her launch, just over 100 feet long, very simply rigged. You did not have to have a big crew to sail this vessel. Maneuvers were very fast. So the square riggers and the big ships, clippers, and things like that took forever when it was time to turn or move around a buoy or turn around a mark, etc. The America, very clean, very simply rigged as a schooner, low, black. She was fast. If you think about this, the design brief, so what they told the designer was fairly complicated and fairly ambitious. She needs to be fast. She needs to be able to win yacht races. She needs to be seaworthy enough to get across the Atlantic on her own keel safely. Those two things sometimes are at odds with each other. And she needs to be proper. These were wealthy gentlemen, and they're going to know that when they get to England, they're going to be visited by royalty, maybe the Queen. And so she needs to be clean and proper. This could not be a beat-up race boat like some of us have spent time on in our time on the bay. She bolts across the Atlantic in 19 days. Just to put this in perspective, the fastest steamships of the era took about 12 to 13 days. The average sailing vessel took about 30 days. So she bolts across the Atlantic in 19 days, an unprecedented fast crossing. A couple of notes on this crossing. The first time a yacht had ever crossed the ocean for the purposes of competing. Right? So no yachts could have, the thought that you would send a yacht across the ocean is just crazy, right? So that's a cool note. Those of you, any sailboat racers, past or present in the group, I know we have a few. So you all would love this little detail. The delivery sails were bent on as she sailed. The racing sails were stowed down below, out of the lights. So this is a no expense spared effort. Yeah, especially no racing sails furled up down below. Peter Boudreau, lives down the road in Bay Ridge, a former Pride of Baltimore captain, is doing painting in his retirement, and he has given me permission to use this in my presentations. I wish it could be in a book. The book images are black and white, and it wouldn't have shown up as well. But this is America crossing the Atlantic for the purposes of competing. Now, if you're beginning to get the idea that this was a special summer for a brand new vessel, I call her a child star in some of my PR material. America reached her most famous pinnacle just a couple of months after she was launched. And there is a lot of information about that first summer of America. August 22nd, 1851, when she won that cup, we know what the weather was, we know who was on the vessel, we know what they ate for lunch, we know every time what sail went up and down, we even know what music the band on the shore was playing when she crossed the finish line. We know all of that. It's almost fetishized, is the word I use, how intense people are about that moment. But my story really picks up afterwards. So we're setting the scene here of America. So America wins a race around the Isle of Wight. Wins this race, trounces the British fleet. And when they get back to shore, they approach, and the thing looks like, again, nothing like the British fleet. And in fact, the famous quote is, she comes out of the fog, and up on the terrace of the Royal Yacht Squadron are the creme de la creme of British yachting, and they all look to the senior-most guy to see what his reaction is, and his reaction is, he says, if she's right, the rest of us are wrong. That's how radical this thing looked. She must have looked like a spaceship coming out. So she trounces the competition in the race. As she's approaching the finish line, indeed, Queen Victoria is aboard the Royal Yacht, observing this, and she says to her signalman, who's leading the fleet? And the signalman replies, the American yacht is, ma'am. And she says, well, who is in second? And the signalman famously answered, anyone?
Nobody yet.
There is no second. There is no second. Just to show you how fetishized this August 22nd day is, there's a book just on that exchange. There literally, somebody wrote a book like, who was the signalman? Would he have had the cojones to say that to the Queen? What were they having for lunch? That sort of thing. There literally is a book just about that exchange, which is pretty fast. I've actually read it. It's pretty fascinating. So America wins the race. What do they get? And it is celebrated. Yankee Doodle's playing as she crosses the finish line, and indeed the Queen visits the vessel. So Queen Victoria shows up to check out this vessel. Now, this painting was made in 1902. I find it very interesting on a few levels. Let's just dive in here. First, she's shown with a wheel, and earlier we saw the tiller. Well, she actually had a tiller on that day. America was so technologically advanced And so much care went into her that she was fitted with a tiller and a wheel, and you could swap them out. So there was a procedure that the team did to swap one for the other that they could do. So when you're racing, you need quick response. You can have that tiller, which is connected directly to the rider. You can pull it up under your chin and make a sharp turn, even on a 100-foot schooner. But when you're delivering or you're cruising, that wheel is much nicer to have. You can put your foot on it and lean back and have your drink, etc. Take a selfie, etc. So she actually had a tiller at the time. The other thing I find that's amazing about this image is there's a lot of legend associated with this Queen's visit. So a member of the syndicate in his autobiography later reported that the Queen came aboard and had a glove on her royal hand and ran it along a shelf and came back and remarked how clean it was. Another great legend that's come down from this is the Queen either knew something about yachts or was well coached. She was allegedly down in the bilge, looking at the bilge, and remarked how nicely the ballast was formed. So instead of just having ingots or stones, which some vessels did, the lead ballast was actually shaped to the sides of the hull so they could get it as low as possible. The Queen commented on that. And my favorite legend from this visit of Queen Victoria to our yacht was that she climbs aboard, as illustrated here, and Prince Albert, the royal consort, just behind her, is about to step aboard, and the captain of the boat, so the man hired to run the boat, old Dick Brown from Mystic, Connecticut, puts his hand up and stops the prince and says, stop. And the prince says, do you know who I am? And I know exactly who you are. You still have to remove your shoes. So these kind of legends began assembling around the vessel. At the same time, the prize she was given that afternoon is this cup. This cup, this sterling silver cup, built by Garrett's, the Queen's jeweler, was just in a trophy locker, storage locker that they had. So the American boaters won the race around the Isle of Wight. We got to give her a trophy. So they go and they pull out this nice looking one, polish it up, and hand it to the owners. This cup. Well, this cup is named America's Cup. That's for the vessel, not for the country. And this is the cup that is still raised for today. Anybody know who the current holders of America's Cup are? New Zealand, right? The Kiwis, the Royal Yacht Squadron has the America's Cup. But this is it. That's the cup that America won in 1851. This is 1987 when Dennis Conner won it in Australia, and he's celebrating in the East Room of the White House with President Reagan. So that is the cup, still the most coveted trophy in the sport of sailing, won by the Yacht America. The cup itself also has books about it. Briefly, they brought the cup back to New York, and it was put away in the library of one of the syndicate members and largely forgotten for about 10 years. They had a proposal to melt it down and make medals for everybody that was involved. We beat the British fleet, etc. Finally, they pulled the cup out, they dust it off, and they decided they're going to start sponsoring a competition for it. And that's the competition that lives on today. The vessel stays behind in England. The owners go back. Their summer was perfect. We won the race, we won a cup, we met the Queen, we got wined and dined, and now we're heading back to New York for whatever's happening that fall. The vessel stays behind and they sell it to a local in England. And it changes hands. And it changes hands again. And one of the new owners finds that she's a bit too racy for his liking. So he cuts down the spars and he adds ballast and he gets rid of that tiller and he just goes with the wheel and he cruises her and she changes hands again. You have a question, Brian?
You know the price when it was sold back then?
The price, I have it in the book. I don't remember off the top of my head. They did make a little bit of money on it, though. I know that. She was the fastest yacht in the world. England, the United Kingdom, Great Britain enters the Crimean War, and the yachting scene stops. And less than 10 years after she won that famous race, America's on a mud bank, rotting in the sun on the south coast of England. And a boat builder, a shipyard owner, buys her as a turnaround project, a flip, you might say. He's going to clean her up a little bit and sell her. That's where she degraded to. So there's this whole philosophy that we come to, what is saved and what's not saved, and what's deserving of being saved, and who makes that decision, etc. Well, America at this point had gone from the fastest yacht in the world, led by the greatest yachtsman in the United States, to on a mud bank in less than 10 years. Well, her new owner shows up and buys her. He's now her fourth owner, and he immediately puts America into harm's way. He's a young man, an Irishman. We don't know too much about him. We don't even really know how his name was spelled. There's no images of him. Henry Darcy, DC, we don't know. There's books about him. He buys America. He shows up with a bill of sale. We have a copy of that, and he buys America. He cleans her up. He loads some friends aboard and sails her back to the United States in 1861. What's about to happen in the United States in 1861? Well, he puts his sights on Savannah, Georgia, and he sails America right into Savannah, Georgia. And this is America's new theater. And he gets in with the Confederate States of America. And he travels to Richmond and begins negotiating with the Confederate Navy. He travels to Mobile and begins negotiating with the Confederate government. And America begins service under the Confederate flag in the Civil War. So DC stays aboard, and she becomes a blockade runner in this theater. And she's a superb blockade runner on a lot of levels. She's low, she's black, she's fast, she's nimble. She can't carry a lot of stuff. She's not going to carry massive amounts of guns or something like that. But if you've got small things that you get in and out or specific people, she proves masterful. Now, there's not a lot of records on this Confederate side about this. I found everything that I could. We know that she operated roughly in this theater, Charleston, Bermuda, Nassau, in this theater. Let's zoom in a little bit here, and we'll go do a quick Civil War break. This is the southeastern coast. The United States Navy put a blockade up here under Samuel DuPont, Big D DuPont, not a small D DuPont. That took some research. And it was called the Anaconda Strategy. And they were going to choke out the South by putting a blockade around the entire South, not allowing anything to get in out of there. America operated here. Port Royal is where Hilton Head is now. That was the DuPont base. So that was a Union base. America very active along in this coast in the early parts of the war. Let's zoom in here. This is the northeast corner of Florida, Mayport to Jacksonville, the St. Johns River running down the center here. About 50 miles up the river is Palatka, small town. There's St. Augustine for reference. So this is America's main port during the Civil War. Things are hot here. She can enter at Mayport and go up to Jacksonville, but always running the risk that when Jacksonville eventually falls, if she's trapped on the inside, she's stuck. And if she's trapped on the outside, she'll have to find a new home port to come in and out of. Well, eventually the Union comes and takes Jacksonville. A Connecticut sailor named Thomas Stevens takes Jacksonville, and they hear rumors that America is inside, and they want to go and retrieve this famous vessel. So they begin going up the river. The Confederates had grabbed a local teenager in the chaos as Jacksonville was falling, named Charles Timmons, and they said, take the schooner up the river as far as you can go and hide her. We cannot let her fall into the Yankees' hands. So young Henry, 16 years old at the time, gets America up the river. She didn't have an engine, and she couldn't sail. It's awfully narrow, so we're guessing, a combination of pushing, pulling, towing, etc. Gets her about 50 miles up the river above Palatka, where the river, and I was here just a couple of winters ago, and if you've ever been in this part of Florida, the river's black, the water's black, and there's kudzu and vines and snakes and all sorts of things up there. It is swampy. So Henry's plan is he's going to get America up to a little bend of this river, and he's going to drill a couple holes in the bottom of her hull and sink her. And the idea would be he would know where those holes were, and when it was time, they would plug them up, pump her out, and get her back up again. That's the plan. That's how he's going to hide her from the Yankees. So he does this and disappears. Stevens gets wind of this. He goes and chases all the way up the river, finds America. After a couple of days, figures out about the holes, gets her up, gets her cleaned up, and brings her back to Port Royal, presents her to Admiral DuPont, Captain DuPont at the time. Thank you for this interesting service, DuPont says. You have brought America back to the United States. We look forward to putting her back to the Naval Academy, or to the Naval Academy for training purposes. Well, big shortage of vessels. She doesn't go to the Naval Academy. America then ends up, that's where she was sank. I mean, I got ahead of myself. A couple of images. of America. DuPont puts America eventually on the blockade in Charleston, protecting the blockade. So she now is at Rattlesnake Shoals, and America served for almost a year there on the blockade. Now with an American flag and an American crew. So she's serving on both sides. And on the American side, she participates in chases, she participates in captures, she's very fast, so she's often the one out leading the chase when there's blockade runners. And she actually has a good service record there on the shoal, on Rattlesnake Shoal. She is sent north for a refit to Boston. This is believed to be the first image of the schooner yacht America, photographic image. You can see the low black schooner, that famous shape, those raised masts. So this is a refit up in Boston. And she makes her way to the Naval Academy at Newport, which is where the academy had been moved during the Civil War to move it away from the South. So she is at the academy when the Civil War ends and returns to Annapolis. So a happy ending, right? This is great. Now America's back in American hands. The Navy owns her. She's at the Naval Academy. I think we've got a wonderful Hollywood ending there. Not quite. Enter General Benjamin Butler. Anybody Civil War history people know General Benjamin Butler, the Beast Butler, occupier of New Orleans? Anybody heard of that name before? I've got a quote in the book from a contemporary of his said, one of the most disliked figures in the war by both sides. Incredibly controversial. He was governor of Massachusetts. He ran for president 3 times in 3 different parties and lost every time. He is an interesting guy. In fact, I gave this lecture in Hampton, Virginia last winter, and Butler had been an occupier in Hampton, just like he was in New Orleans later. And when I said his name in Hampton, there were a smattering of boos in the audience. They remembered the name, the Hampton folks. It had been passed down. This guy was kind of a jerk. I was in Marblehead last month giving this lecture at the Eastern Yacht Club, and there were actually direct descendants of General Butler in the room. They came up to me afterwards and said, we're his 3rd great-grandchildren of the general, which is pretty amazing. And then another person came up to me and said, at a different event, I'm writing a book about General Butler's civil rights activity and what a great leader he was in civil rights, and how that should be his legacy, not being a weird jerk occupier. So very mixed in. Well, he loved God, he loved America, and he often got what he wanted. So he pushed the U.S. government to sell him America, and he buys America for $5,000, and he becomes an excellent steward of the yacht. He fixes her up, he spares no expense. He sails her, they cruise her to Bermuda, they cruise her to Cuba, they race her in races in the Northeast. He has the best equipment, the best sailors, and his obituary eventually states he was at his happiest aboard the yacht. The windier, the better. He would sit at the wheel and laugh as the spray came over his face. The icebox always had cold beverages in it, and it was always a wonderful mood aboard the America. So an odd figure in history, but a wonderful steward for America. He takes great care of her. Here's a photo of her here. She's painted white and re-rigged. This is also during the Butler era. This is off of Montauk, Gardner's Island up in that area. As happens in these stories, Butler dies. His heirs take over. They love America too. They grew up sailing aboard her. However, they didn't have the funds, the wherewithal, or the depth of passion that the general did. So America begins falling into disrepair. We've seen the story before with houses and boats and things in our lives, right? So they love it. They think it's great. She's great, but they're not quite where the general was. America ends up in Boston, under a cover, next to the Chelsea Bridge, tossing mournfully, as one newspaper ad said. And eventually, she's put up for sale by the Butler heirs. In the early 1920s, Sir Thomas Lipton, famous yacht racer from the UK, shows up and says he's interested in buying America. Well, the yachting community harumphs a little bit, as they sometimes do, even to this day. He says, we can't sell the famous schooner yacht America to somebody from out of the United States. This is an American icon. 1917, the New York Times thought that his interest was so great that they published this article about America. Nobody stepped forward to buy her, though. Lipton goes away. The New York Yacht Club, who the original race was under their purview, says maybe we'll buy America and use her as a race committee vote, where it's a celebratory vote, that sort of thing, a commemorative vote. Nothing happens. Finally, in 1921, a group of yachtsmen in Marblehead put together a fund led by Charles Francis Adams. They had just done the Constitution in Boston, and they were inspired by that. They put together a fund and they bought America from the Butler heirs. And they're going to send her to the Naval Academy in 1921. So we began a journey down the East Coast from Boston to Annapolis. The New York Times covers it in September 1921, day by day. She visits guiding centers as she goes. She's celebrated everywhere she goes. When I was at Larchmont last fall, they had the menu of the dinner they had that night that they showed me. She was anchored on a mooring right off Larchmont's waterfront there. They had a big party. Stopped the guiding centers on the coast all the way down to Annapolis. She pulls in. Oh, let's back up here. Here she is leaving Boston. So this is a neat story, just an incredible photograph, right? Incredible. That's a Navy minesweeper. It's going to be her escort vessel. Tow her down there. There's America. That round cockpit back there. You can see the spars shipped on deck. Big old bowsprit. I found this photo in an archive, and I reached out to the descendants of the photographer, whose name was Leslie Jones. And Leslie Jones, he was a famous Boston sports photographer, very well known up in Boston. And I found his grandchildren and said, "May I have permission to use a couple of your grandfather's photos in the book?" And they laughed and they said, "Usually when we do one of our grandfather's photos, it's Ted Williams or it's Fenway Park, and even the beginning of Bobby Moore's career. And nobody's ever asked me these pictures before. Of course, we would love to have those in your book." So we got this from that, and then here she is heading down the coast, heading for Annapolis. As this brig comes into the Severn River, 2 seaplanes fly over top and dip their wings. The entire brigade of midshipmen are waiting on the dock as she arrives. America's coming home, 1921. Perfect ending to the story. Down on the dock at the Academy, the superintendent of the Naval Academy pays Charles Francis Adams $1 in a symbolic move to buy America on behalf of the government. The Brigade of Midshipmen is assembled on the deck of America. She now is property of the United States Naval Academy. Remember, the Naval Academy, while excited about this, did not ask for America. She is at this point a 70-year-old wooden vessel that had been ridden hard and put away wet. And it's spent the last 20 years, undercover at a dock in Boston. They did not have this kind of yachting in their curriculum at that point. They were very focused on steam and traditional sailing, while in the curriculum was not high up. So they weren't asking for the vessel. They didn't necessarily have the facilities to take care of the vessel, and it was not in the curriculum. So what happens to America at the Naval Academy? Well, she gets put into a permanent slip. So we're all familiar with this. This is the Academy. Let's zoom in a little bit. This is the Santee Basin, where the sailing team is based today, Bancroft Hall. Right, this is what the shoreline looks like in 1921. Here's our names. This is landfill that was put in the late 50s. The Dewey Basin is now where that track and field situation is. And America was docked right there on the corner in the Dewey Basin. And if you were to stand right there looking out, this is what you would have seen. So there's America in 1921. There's a seaplane in the background there for those of you with good eyes on the Severn River. I'm sure you want to remember those. That's America. The gangplank bolted to her deck. She did not move. Year after year after year. Occasionally they put some flags on her on a special date to dress her up. Midshipmen tumbled aboard for class photographs. Here's a class aboard in 1930 getting their photos on America. I met with a couple of gentlemen who grew up in Annapolis, Lester Trott. I'm sure some of you remember Lester Trott. Sonny Smith, who recently passed away. I remember his boys growing up in downtown Annapolis during this era. They would go onto America and climb around and play pirate on her decks. Sonny told me that he had a lot of sword fights up on the bow of the vessel when he was a young man growing up on Market Street in Annapolis. So America was a fixture, but she did not go sailing. She did not go sailing. really neat photograph of Annapolis, the Academy in the late 1930s, and there's America at her slip. Again, a lot of landfill came in the 50s, so you can see a much smaller footprint, but there's America in her slip. So what's going to happen? We go into the Depression, and America sits there, tossing mournfully, had not been hauled in over 10 years, had not been sailed in probably 35, 40 years. So President Franklin Roosevelt is a fan of yachting. He grew up sailing. He grew up ice boating on the Hudson River. He's an accomplished sailor. He goes sailing often when he's president. When I was doing research on this, at one point, he went off on a schooner into the Gulf of Maine for 5 days while he was president. Just went off the grid for 5 days with go cruising. What a great era that was, right? So he was an active yachtsman and through his whole life, and he loved naval history. And he heard that America was in Annapolis. So let's take a quick trip. There's America. Let's take a quick trip across the creek to Eastport, and we'll move to this section of Eastport, where in the late 1930s, 2 entrepreneurial young men from New York City took over a failed boatyard. So the Chance Boatyard was on this facility. It had overexpanded. They were trying to build the yacht basin across the creek, which eventually got built. And they were trying to expand their facilities, got a bit overextended, and the Reconstruction Finance Company took over. So if you remember your high school social studies class, the RFC was designed to take failed businesses in the Depression and match them with new owners to try to get the economy going again. So these 2 young entrepreneurial gentlemen from New York, one an MIT trained naval architect, the other the salesman and the leader of workers, come together. They get together with the leading citizens of Annapolis, the president of Farmers Bank, the president of AT&T, the mayor, the editor of the Evening Capital, and they get a big push, and they open what they call the Annapolis Yacht Yard on this site. This is what it looks like in 1939. A little bit sleepy, but man, these guys have big dreams. They're still in their 30s. They think Annapolis can be the next yachting center, and they're the ones that are going to do it. Their dream is to begin building new boats on this property. This is what it looks like. This is Spa Creek in the foreground, Bat Creek in the background. These buildings are no longer there, but some of these houses are. But this is what the waterfront looks like in the late 1930s. This is their dream. They're going to take Detroit-style production lines, and they're going to build wooden powerboats. And they're going to build them in a series. So 10 at once, 12 at once, 20 at once. So they begin advertising in the yachting magazines that they're going to be building these boats in Annapolis. Now, I have become friends with the descendants of these 2 gentlemen, Chris Nelson and Eric Allman. And I say I love their chutzpah, their cojones, their bravado. They're in Eastport, Maryland. It's still a distinct place. They're in Eastport, Maryland, but they call themselves the Annapolis Yacht Yard. They have no association with the Navy at all, but they do pose their vessels in front of Bancroft Hall to get some of that nice association with the Naval Academy. They're good at marketing. This is in a magazine, but it's coming out of the Depression, and things are slow. And they don't start selling a lot of these vessels. And wars begin to loom. And it becomes clear that the ultimate customer for the Annapolis Yacht Yard is the United States Navy. And the Navy at this point is going around and trying to match production capabilities with the needs of the U.S. Navy and allies in the Land Lease program. So it comes on the radar screen, the Annapolis Yacht Yard of the Navy in Washington. This is the last couple of vessels built at the Annapolis Yacht Yard. These are custom boats, just beautiful. This was built in Eastport, right down there at 222 Severn Avenue episode. And then this lovely one from now on was built. This is the last private vessel built in the Annapolis Yacht Yard in 1940. A young steel executive that dropped out in Princeton and made a lot of money as a steel salesman. He wasn't even 40 yet. He commissioned this boat at the Annapolis Yacht Yard. It had air conditioning, running ice water, fluorescent lights. And he was a man who loved, and this is all from articles in the yachting magazine, he was a man who loved the open air and the smell of salt in his nose. So he asked for an open deck up top so he could steer his boat from up top. I thought that was pretty cool. So that's from now on, last vessel built there. So in the meanwhile, President Roosevelt's son, James Roosevelt, well, let's just review where we are. There's still a depression hanging on. There's a war about to start. So if you're the president's son, why don't you take the summer and go cruising on the schooner? So the president's son charters the Sewana, and he's sailing his vessel up and down the East Coast in the summer of 1939. And he drops in the outsider and has some work done. And he reports to his father, hey, Dad, there's a really nice new yacht yard in Eastport, just across from the academy. They did great work on the schooner. And I was very impressed with the guys. Perhaps that might be a nice place to move America. President Roosevelt has a vision of a naval museum in the water in Washington, D.C., with famous naval vessels that you could go aboard, kind of like a Mystic Seaport, but for the Navy. And America was to be the centerpiece. So quietly, behind the scenes, wheels go into motion, and America is moved across the creek on a windy December night in 1940. So these buildings aren't there anymore, the ones that just moved in dark. These are where the United States Marine Railways were. America is hauled on a windy evening in December 1940 on a king tide. They needed all the water they could to get her on the railway, and she's hauled. One of the locals on the scene that was there said she was groaning and complaining as they brought her out of the water. Had not been out of the water in more than 10 years. Another remarked on the smell. We all know that smell of wood that's been in water for a long time. They said the smell spread out across the entire facility. America's hauled out, creaking on the Marine Railway. They go home for dinner that night. They come back the next morning. This is what they find. They find a vessel in rough shape. However, teenage Lawrence Archie, who some of you in this room may know, and he was a good friend of mine, teenage Lawrence Archie drops by, because he hears America's been hauled, and he snaps this photograph, which when he handed me the print from 1940, I said, Mr. Archie, you're incredible. You did the State House in one corner, and you can't see it because of our Zoom thing, but the Naval Academy Chapel in the other corner, and this looks like an art frame. This is like the kind of thing I might see in a Ritz-Carlton, in a Ritz-Carlton hotel room, like a beautiful silver tone art print. He laughed and said, I was 16 years old and had a Kodak variety camera. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. The fact that those buildings there was pure luck. So I actually wanted that to be the cover of the book at one point. It's just a little too artsy. So this is what they find when they come back the next morning. She is in rough shape. They report that there's wood so brittle that a hammer goes right through it. They report that they were peeling off rotten planks to find rotten planks underneath. Way inside, they found some original 1851 oak frames. The original 1851 teak keel is still in place, but much of the wood is rotten and falling apart. These are survey photos that the Navy took when they came to have a look. You'll see the eagle has been replaced with a much more modest eagle than the one we saw at the beginning. The original eagle was one of her trademarks, spanning the entire transom, gold leaf painted. That eagle disappeared during all those sales in England. And in fact, in the early 20th century, some New York Yacht Club members were on holiday on the Isle of Wight in a pub and saw it on the wall, the actual eagle that they remembered from Pageant. They bought it from the owner, and it's in the New York Yacht Club clubhouse in Manhattan right now. So this is a nod by the Adams Syndicate. And they does have Boston as the hailing port because they're the ones that bought it, right? So Boston is the hailing port. This building is no longer here at the yacht yard, but we'll show you what's there. Another survey picture. You can see the Carroll House in the background there under her bow, just to give you an idea of where we are geographically. So what happens is the Annapolis Yacht Yard? Well, they begin getting Navy contracts. So America's hauled in the middle of their yard, and the U.S. government is calling. And in February 1942, they launched a 110-foot Annapolis-built wooden submarine chaser into Spa Creek, 7 weeks after Pearl Harbor. Very big deal. Measure what happened in the United States after September 1, 2001, how everybody got surrounding the flag, and we all were fans for a couple of weeks of those New York sports teams because, and when the president, didn't matter what your politics were, when the president jumped up on that pile of rubble with a megaphone, we were all behind it, everybody was, regardless of their politics. same program after Pearl Harbor. So if your hometown boatyard is building warships for the U.S. Navy 7 weeks after Pearl Harbor, 1,000 people come out to this launch on a cold February morning. 1,000 people come out, and they're proud. You know, my dad, my neighbor, my cousin, my schoolmate are working at that yard. So it becomes a real source of pride. It ends up having over 400 people working there. 3 ships around the clock, largest private employer in Annapolis. So busy that when they would do a shift change, right at the driveway of 222 Severn Avenue, every day a city of Annapolis police officer came to direct traffic because it was so busy coming in and out of there. Because I'm a nerd, I went down there on the exact time, on the exact day, a couple winters ago, and made this to show you what it looks like today. So I'll do that one more time. So you can walk down there today and see that. And picture February 1942, 1,000 people gathered around, and a ship sponsor here, and a bottle of champagne that she smashes on the bow, Navy grass all over the place, etc. This is the big shed at the Annapolis yard. It still stands. It was built to house 6 70-foot patrol torpedo boats under construction at once. They would begin them in this shed. Here they are, taken by David Gendell, who passed away a couple years ago. He was a 24-year-old Navy incident station there. Another photo in the big shed. They were finally able to have their Detroit production line, building patrol torpedo boats. They would build sections of these en masse and store them, and when they needed them, they would just snap them in, snap the parts in. They tried to go as vertical as possible because it was difficult to source materials during the war because of rationing and transportation, et cetera. So in fact, one of the innovations they did was they came up with their own marine plywood, and they made the marine plywood on site. So these flat sections you see up on the decks in the cabin house, the bandstand, as they call this, were marine plywood that was made there on site. They did as much material on site as possible rather than have to buy it from elsewhere. This is the first patrol torpedo boat. They call it a BPT 21. There's a big section in the book about 21. This is her launch into Spa Creek. Torpedo tubes not yet fit on there. PT boats, very sexy. PT boats, fast, nimble, can pack a punch. Young Navy officers were attracted to them because they were an independent command. You could be on an admiral's staff on some big battleship or carrier, taking notes and fetching coffee for an admiral, or you could be in command of your own 70-foot vessel. It went 45 knots. It had torpedoes and had machine guns on the deck. Very attractive to a certain type of young naval officer, including a future president of the United States who raised his hand. And that guy could have gotten on any admiral's staff. And he raised his hand and said, I want to be on one of those PT boats. Not an Annapolis-built boat, but the same spirit. So they were featured in advertising throughout the war. They could pack a punch, operate a shell war, etc. Just some incredible imagery of the images that these PT boats had. I know we've got some boaters in the group, so let's be boat nerds for a moment and compare the last private vessel built at the Annapolis Yacht Yard with one of the 70-foot patrol torpedo boats. So you see, they're both about 70 feet long. They both have this kind of clipper bow. They both have a step, which was more of a aesthetic move on the yacht. And here it's so the torpedo can clear. They both have an open air bandstand up top. I find that interesting. They both have these long flat runs aft. This is powered by 3 Packard gasoline engines. It goes 45 knots. This topped out at about 20 knots. But I did find, as somebody that loves boats and loves this stuff, there's some DNA shared between these two things. So the Navy, when they were matching capabilities with ease, picked the right place. They ended up building more than 100 of these patrol torpedo boats. Most went to the Royal Navy. Many went to the Soviet Navy. Soviets were our allies in World War II. This is the letterhead of the Annapolis Yacht Yard. So it's got a From Now On, which was that last yacht, and then it's got a Vosper patrol torpedo boat. Here we are running in the Chesapeake Bay at about 45 knots. Loud, smelling of high-octane gasoline all the time, rumbling along, just a thrilling ride. 46 knots was as fast as they ever got one, over off the canal and measured mile. Lots of great stories around this I have in the book. They would deliver most of these to the Brooklyn Navy Yard on their own keels. So they would finish one. They would start building them in the big shed. They would move them to what the chart house is now. They would be finished in that shed. And then they would go to the Brooklyn Navy Yard on their own keels. And in the winter, when there was ice in the C&D Canal, they would go around through the Virginia Capes and go up the coast. It was not a risk-free trip. There were U-boats nearby. It was winter. You're making your way up the coast on a new, somewhat unproven boat. Then you have to pass into the New York Narrows, which are closed and have booms out, and you have to signal your way in. And then at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they get hoisted onto the deck of a larger Liberty ship and taken across the Atlantic that way. The Annapolis Yacht Yard becomes a famous producer of these. They were running ads in the yachting magazines during World War II, just to remind people of what they were working on. Black & Decker, a Baltimore company, gets involved and automates much of the assembly line. They bring in electric screw guns, electric hammers, electric drills, and Black & Decker becomes an important partner of the Annapolis Yacht Yard, supplying and helping them become more and more efficient. Packard advertising. Double truck, as we used to call that magazine business, a two-page spread. So this is all Annapolis Yacht Yard advertising. The Axis is now feeling the death sting of the Annapolis-built Vosper motor torpedo boats. In the meanwhile, our girl, what do we got our girl? She's in the middle of all this. Our schooner. Let's not forget her. So the Annapolis Yacht Yard has developed into this warship factory, and America is right there, in the way, constantly. And they keep getting these back channel messages from Washington. How's it coming on the schooner? And the Navy guys on the site are saying, including when I had a chance to interview a few times, are saying, you keep asking us for more patrol torpedo boats and faster. We can't work on the schooner. Yes, we want you to work on the schooner. So finally, in the summer of 1942, they send a note to Washington from Annapolis. It says, at the present time, the subject vessel, meaning America, is using space which could be made available for the building of one 110-foot submarine chaser. So a 24-year-old ensign named Richard Miller, Dick Miller, lived in Baywoods for the last few years of his life, lived off the Harness Creek Road for years. Dick Miller sent this, stage 24, and he said, it was the fastest reply I've ever got in the Navy. My phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was my boss's boss, Captain Loring Swayze, a famous guy in Euro ships. And Loring Swayze said, what the hell is this memo? And Dick Miller said, well, sir, you want more patrol torpedo boats? We should dismantle America, and we could use that space. And he said, not only no, but hell no. Dick Miller replies, sir, with all due respect, can you please explain why this schooner needs, and he said, Franklin wishes it so. So that was it. The president, behind the scenes, even with this war going on, wanted to see America, progress on America. Well, they did a little bit of progress as they went along, but they knew that with the coming winter, they wanted to build a shed over top of America to keep her out of the weather and to keep the workmen out of the weather when they were working. Lots of oral histories, and a couple of the boat builders very specifically said the house carpenter built that shed. So anybody that's been on the work site would know that the boat builders have a specific set of skills. They're working with this wood to build knots and warships. The house carpenter is the guy that kind of builds it. Oh, if you need a box built, or if you need a shipping crate put together, or some stairs built, that's the guy that does that. He's working with 2x4s and corrugated tin and that sort of stuff. He's not a yacht builder. He's not a boat builder. He is a house carpenter. The house carpenter builds a shed over top of America that's connected to the big shed that we saw. Palm Sunday, 1942, unusually heavy snowstorm. We've all been in those spring snowstorms where the snow is like wet and heavy, and when we get a shovel of it, you know, you can feel like, wow, this is wet snow, we always say. It was that kind of snow on a Sunday morning. They call in the skeleton crew to the yacht yard, and the first thing when they get there, they punch their cards in, and they say, we're worried about the shed over America. Go get some shovels and some ladders and start shoveling the snow off the shed of the America. These young men went out into the yard and were collecting shovels and ladders, and they are approaching the shed and collapsed. They were so close, they felt an outrush of cold air. Lyle Gaither, lifelong Eastport resident, is the foreman that day. He runs over, grabs the time cards out, and starts shouting. He was worried that he had killed his men underneath that shed, or on top of that shed. Nobody was killed, but that was it for our girl. The shed collapses on America. Here's the official reply. In view of great national interest of the historic value of America, the Bureau does not consider this procedure advisable. This is America after the shed collapse. Not good. Not good. You can see St. Mary's in the back on there for point of reference. Now the city dock and the Academy Chapel for point of reference. This is America after the shed collapse. It was difficult to tell what was shed and what was America, was one of the quotes. Not good. Especially with the president's eyes on your program. Not good. So America sits there, and they begin launching patrol torpedo boats. And this is the big shed. It's still there. And there's America. And there's one oak frame, probably put it there for the president. They put it in an oak frame today, sir. They've just launched a patrol torpedo boat into Spa Creek. You've got Navy brass here. You've got yacht yard workers here. You've got leaders here. This is Eric Allman. And his family finally explained to me what he's doing in this picture. I'd always wondered. And he said they just snatched a bottle of champagne. And it was in a mesh bag. And he ran up underneath and collected some of the champagne. And they're laughing, and he's pretending to drink the champagne out of his hand. I've always wondered what he was doing. His family told me that. So I went and did the same thing on this. And we can see what it looks like today. That's the spot. We'll do that one more time. 1942 to today. That's the spot. Still there. So this is, I'm winding out here. I know we're at time. This is the Indianapolis Yacht Yard at its best and highest at the end of the war. There's 12 patrol torpedo boats visible in this picture, which is spectacular. There's guard sheds all over the place in this picture. There's one right there. There's one right there. There's another one right there. Armed guards with revolvers in their pockets or in their holsters. High security around this place. Sheds there for boat building. Let's note that the boat building sheds tend to have skylights, so they have a lot of natural light. They're not burning energy. They tend to have huge openings where boats can come in and out of. This odd shed right here does not have skylights, does not have any windows. Has one tiny door. This is the shed they built over the wreckage of America. They called this the America shed. They locked the door and stayed locked throughout the rest of the war. One local later wrote, they built the shed over her ruins to hide their shame of the accident. So this is the chart house. Today that still stands. This is the big shed today that still stands. So that's Indianapolis Yacht Yard at its best. Highest. Let's take a very quick look at today. That's today. So one more time on that. That's today. Pretty remarkable. Spoiler alert: America and her allies win the war. The town goes wild. The Indianapolis Yacht Yard begins trying to deal with their America problem. And what are they going to do after the war? Well, the Navy was keen to move on after the war. President Roosevelt was dead. There was not a great desire to save America. And in fact, the yacht yard owners were kind of keen just to give it back to the Navy. The Navy was not very keen to take it back. So the compromise they reached very quietly out of the public eye, but all the way up to President Truman's desk, was that America would be scrapped. They would take America apart. We can review today, in the lens of 2025, all the things that could have happened. We could have taken her piece by piece and moved her to for his bay, moved church in North Severn, the ruins, put them in a shed somewhere and dealt with the mayor, etc. 1945, the war was over, and everyone just wanted to get on with their lives. And remember, her main sponsor was the president, who was no longer on the scene. So the Navy arranges with the Annapolis Yacht Yard, November 27, 1945, to break up America. And this is the bill for that job. And this is a little bit heartbreaking to read. America's going to get scrapped. And they give the yacht yard credit for $200 scrap lumber and $50 for pig iron, meaning the physical form of the schooner was worth $500 at that point of the schooner Yacht America. The Annapolis Yacht Yard again keen to get going on their new vessels. So what happens to the America? Unceremoniously, a clamshell crane and a dump truck come down the 2nd Street entrance, back entrance, come in and piece by piece bite into the wreckage into the back of a dump truck and haul it off to the city dump, which at that point was down off Defense Highway where Waterworks Park is now. It was down there. The local yachting community and the national yachting community is fairly outraged by this. Herbert Stone, the influential editor of Yachting Magazine, writes a scathing editorial. Up at Mystic Seaport, which had just been formed, they write another letter down to the Navy saying, had you told us, we would have come and taken her off of your hands. We would have done this. We would have raised funds to do this. Locally, Pete Magruder, the wartime commodore of the Annapolis Yacht Club, is very upset by this, and he begins a letter writing campaign, but it's too late. And it's just two young men, Marshall Dorr, who was Baltimore Gibson Island guy, founder of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the Chesapeake Bay Yacht Racing Association. Marshall Dorr, as a young man, and Ed Gitcheroon go to the dump and ask, hey, where did the Eastport truck dump all that wood? And I go over there. And they began pulling planks out of the wreckage and salvaging planks from the wreckage, salvaging whatever they could get. All through the war, people have been taking over that hulk, especially after the shed collapsed. And there's stories that whenever brass would come from the Navy, the owners of the yacht yard would go over and break off a hunk and hand it to them and say, here's a hunk of the True Cross for you. Here's a hunk of the America. So all over Annapolis and beyond are homes of America. Anybody in this room have a piece of the Schooner America? There's always a few. Somebody brought a lamp to a presentation that I had done that's made out of America wood. Somebody else brought a trophy, yachting trophy that they had won. It's Severn Sound Association where this gentleman was with me last winter. Behind the screen, I raised it up there, mantle as a piece of the Schooner Yacht America. And as I said, West River has a bunch. Tax Sailing Association has a bunch of wood. My favorite America hunk of wood story is Fred Heckler, the aforementioned. Fred had a bunch of America wood, came from that Disharoon pile. And Fred was a surveyor and that kind of a guy. I wouldn't call him native architect, but he had that kind of line. And Fred could carve a half hull of a vessel from memory. But he could carve America half hulls very fast. So Fred would carve America half hulls out of that wood, just little mini ones, and mount them and authenticate them on the back, as Fred would do. And he carried them in the trunk of his car. And the story that always went around was in Marmaduke, Fred would drink there in the 70s. And when his bar tab got too high, the bartender would say, Fred, your bar tab is too high, I'm not serving it until you pay me. He'd go out to the trunk of his car, grab a few of the Schooner America half hulls, and sell them to the bar patrons around him, and authenticate them, and then pay his bar bill out. So you want to see one of those Fred Hecklinger half hulls on the wall at the Boatyard Bar and Grill is one of the Fred little ones made out of America wood, hanging there now. So, so I get asked a lot, how do we know if our piece of wood is real? Lawrence Archie told me, if you took all of the America wood together, you'd build a couple of them. And then they added, we don't know if it's 1851 wood or if it's 1942 wood, right? Or anything in between. But my take, if you read the book, is it doesn't matter. Let's authenticate all of them. It's the spirit. People care enough about this vessel to want to have a piece of wood from the America. And I can go romantic on it, and I do in the book, and I do in real life. If you hold one of those pieces of wood in your hand, there's some magic there, right? There's some magic in that, no matter what era it was. So how do we end our story? The Annapolis Yacht Yard designed this Buck Rogers looking boat which remarkably looks like the modern jet boats you see at the powerboat show. It's 1946. They were not able to build this. The owner developed heart trouble. Chris Nelson developed heart trouble. There's some money problems. There's some dispute with the Navy over their final contracts. Huge payroll, massive payroll, and they ended up in financial difficulty coming out of the war once those Navy contracts stopped. They are rescued by John Trumpy. Comes down from New Jersey, across from Philadelphia, wants a cleaner place to build his vessels. So he comes down and buys the Annapolis Yard Box Dock and Barrel. So he buys a incredibly trained workforce, state-of-the-art tools, state-of-the-art facilities, a place that had produced over 100 vessels in the prior 4 years, ready to roll. And the Trumpies began building wooden yachts there from 1946 through 1974. And in 1974, wooden yachts were out of fashion. They had some labor difficulties. They had a fire in there, which I'm sure some of you remember hearing about it. They had some labor difficulties with unions and things, and people don't want wooden boats anymore. So Trumpy's closed. And it was redeveloped by a businessman named Jay Templeton into the mixed-use facility that it is today. You can walk around 222 7th Avenue and still see some of the buildings, still get the vibe, still get where America was. There's a dumpster there, which I find sad, but also, kind of entertaining in a bizarre way. So it lives there in that way. Trumpy did not build the PT boats. Trumpy came afterwards. The Annapolis Yard built the PT boat. What happened to the Annapolis PT boats? Almost every time I get to talk, somebody rode on this thing up in Wildwood, New Jersey. This was a vessel in Wildwood in the 1970s that you could ride on, and it would rip you around out in the ocean and do wild turns and go fast, etc. This was an Annapolis patrol torpedo boat that was converted into a ride. This is the last one that we know about that's still in somewhat original form. This is at a museum in Ohio. They're restoring her, but this is part that breaks my heart. They're restoring her to look like an Elko because they wanted her to look like PT-109. Not the Annapolis boat. So they're making changes to the cosmetics. That's what that's up in Ohio. That's happening right now. 3 reproductions built of the Schooner America. 1967, the Schaefer Brewing Company sponsored one that was built up in Maine. Very close, as close as the original. They were planes from the original. They got as close as they could. Built this. This vessel spent a lot of time on the Chesapeake Bay in the 70s. Some of you may remember seeing this on the bay in the 70s. It is currently under restoration in Italy. And it's on Instagram. Schooner America 1967. So that's under restoration in Italy. The second one was built in 1995. This has also spent a lot of time in Annapolis. This was a Alexandria, Virginia restaurateur built this one. This is probably coming back this coming summer, I've been told. This is often in Key West. This is often in San Diego. It goes back and forth through the Panama Canal. Remarkable, incredible vessel. Slightly different. She's a little thicker and it's covered up here, but her stern is a lot thicker. She's got her own stateroom back there, and she has 2 big John Deere diesel engines in there. And she's also built to carry passengers. So the Coast Guard has a lot of watertight bulkheads and things like that. So that's 1995. Schooner America. And I have 3 books which I'm not allowed to sell at the library. We learned this evening. So Thomas Point Show Lighthouse, Last Stages of Schooner America, which you just heard about, and the new one, Battles at Annapolis, which is about the 2 most recent Army-Navy football games played in Annapolis. Old Fox Books has these. The Annapolis Maritime Museum has these. Barnes & Noble Annapolis has these, and in the other online places. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Before we do that, a couple quick announcements. So we do the John Wright speaker series. Most months we take off in the summer and winter, so we will not be having one in December, but when we come back in the year 2026, we will be having a couple presenters I can tell you about. One will be Jay Fleming, will be coming to talk to us in the winter of 2026, and also we'll be getting a pilot or two from the Chesapeake Bay Pilots Association. People that drive those big tanker ships off the bay, and it's fascinating work that they do. So we'll be having one of them in the winter series as well. Quick show of hands. When we do these midweek, I'm going to ask to raise your hands for like 6 o'clock at the time versus 7 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Does this work for people? Who would like an hour later at 7 o'clock? Looking forward. Very scientific. Thank you. Yes, we have time for a few questions, and like you said, you can find his book at those places, and they make a great gift. Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you. Yes,
You mentioned that owner number 2, as far as when it was bought after number 4,
yes.
where was the height of the spars reestablished?
Yeah, so for Zoom, the question is, the second owner cut the spars down to make her less racy. Did she subsequently get taller masts again? And the answer is yes. Butler sailed her well, and technology got to the point where they were able to have a much bigger sail plane than the original sail plane. They added ballast, they changed the configuration a bit, and didn't look much like the 1851 rig, but was much taller, much bigger spread of sails. Because he was racing her, and he'd be pushing, so he would hire riggers and designers to keep him up to date as she went along. Any other questions? Yes.
Over her lifetime, it's been replanted.
Had she over her lifetime had she been replanted? Yeah, so that's the ship of Theseus question, where if you begin removing parts, at what point does it stop being the original thing? Right. So if you replace 51% of the wood, is it still the original vessel? What if 90% of the wood had been replaced? And the guess is about 90% of the wood had been replaced by the time it got to Annapolis. So yes, she had been replaced, and the original 1851 wood was way down inside her, is what the boat builders said. Oak frames, oak, yes, teak, oak, white oak frames, teak keel. Other questions? Yes.
Well, staying in water for all those years untended, without body paint, wasn't warm stuff like it?
Yeah, so without bottom paint, what would happen to the bottom? So her bottom was coppered, and in 1930, about 10 years before she was hauled, she was towed to Norfolk, Virginia, and recoppered. So she did have that, and over the years she would have copper put on her bottom. They would actually literally put copper plates on the bottom, and in today's bottom paint, the copper is the element that makes it work. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yes. Is it?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Yeah, that's right.
That's still in there and it's still floating.
Yeah, and that was so the Constitution in the Boston picture is what the gentleman mentioned. So Charles Francis Adams was a pretty remarkable guy, and he had been Secretary of the Navy prior to this, and he was a wealthy Bostonian yachtsman, and he had led the Constitution's refit, and that was very inspiring to them. So they were hoping to do a similar thing with America. So it's not surprising it's in the background. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to stick around if anybody wants to keep chatting. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your interest in this subject.